Welcome to the Daily History Chronicle. Each day, we travel back to discover a pivotal moment that changed the world. These aren't just dates and facts. They're stories of courage, conflict, innovation, and consequence that still echo through our lives today. Are you ready to explore? Let's see what happened on this day in history.
This is the Daily History Chronicle, where we explore the moments that shaped our world and discover why they still matter today. I'm Richard Backus, publisher of University Teaching Edition, and every day I get to share a piece of history that I think you'll find as fascinating as I do. On February 1st, 1960, 4 black college freshmen walked into a Woolworth store in Greensboro, North Carolina. They bought some toothpaste, a few small items, and kept their receipts. Then they sat down at the lunch counter and politely asked for coffee. And here's what fascinates me about this moment. These 4 teenagers, Joseph McNeil was only 17 years old, weren't doing anything radical. They weren't shouting. They weren't disrupting. They were simply asking to buy a cup of coffee in a store that had just taken their money for toothpaste. The receipts in their pockets proved they were customers. Their request was reasonable. And the system was so fundamentally broken that this simple, reasonable act paralyzed an entire store, baffled the police, and within weeks would spark a movement across 55 cities in 13 states. Understanding what happened requires holding multiple truths simultaneously. These 4 young men showed extraordinary courage. But they didn't act alone. Women at nearby Bennett College had been planning similar protests and would sustain the movement for months. The sit-in was meticulously planned, yet its explosive spread was spontaneous. And while we celebrate this moment as a triumph, the lives of the 4 men afterward tell a more complicated story about the cost of courage. Picture this. It's a Monday afternoon about 4:30, midwinter in North Carolina. 4 young men in their best clothes, coats, ties, the kind of attire their parents taught them would command respect, walk into the F.W. Woolworth store at 132 South Elm Street. The store is busy. White shoppers browse the aisles. Behind the long L-shaped lunch counter, waitresses serve coffee, sandwiches, and banana splits to white customers seated on 66 chrome stools. Joseph McNeil, Franklin McCain, Ezell Blair Jr., and David Richmond, all freshmen at North Carolina Agricultural and Technical State University, make their purchases. They approach the lunch counter, they sit down, they ask for coffee. A white waitress approaches. The exchange is almost scripted by now, except these young men have decided not to follow the script. "We don't serve Negroes here," she tells them. Blair, who would later change his name to Jabril Kazan, points to the receipts in his hand. "You just served us 2 feet away. Why not here?" The manager, Clarence Harris, calls the police. An officer arrives, pacing behind the students, slapping his nightstick against his palm. But the young men have done nothing illegal. They've made purchases. They've been polite. They're sitting quietly. The officer doesn't know what to do. The store closes early. The 4 students walk out, having been denied a cup of coffee, but having won something far more significant. Franklin McCain would later describe the feeling, "People take on religion to try to get that feeling." Let me build the clock for you, because this didn't happen in a vacuum. 6 years earlier, in 1954, the Supreme Court had ruled in Brown versus Board of Education that segregated schools were unconstitutional, but the ruling had almost no effect on private businesses. In 1955, Rosa Parks refused to give up her seat on a Montgomery bus, launching a boycott that brought a young preacher named Martin Luther King Jr. to national attention. That same year, 14-year-old Emmett Till was lynched in Mississippi for allegedly whistling at a white woman, a murder that seared itself into the consciousness of a generation. By 1959, Joseph McNeil was a smart, ambitious freshman from Wilmington, North Carolina. He'd spent the holidays with family in New York City, where he'd been served at lunch counters without incident. On the bus ride back to Greensboro, traveling deeper into the South, he stopped at the Greyhound station in Richmond, Virginia, and asked for a hot dog. They refused to serve him. For me, McNeil later said, that was the final blow of humiliation. I had had enough. Back at A&T, McNeil lived in Scott Hall with 3 other freshmen, Blair, McCain, and Richmond. They lived on the same floor. They studied together. They talked late into the night about what Franklin McCain called the big lie. The promise their parents had made that if they worked hard, got good grades, were polite and respectable, the American dream would be theirs. They were discovering that the promise was hollow. McCain, who had grown up in Washington, D.C., had tested segregation as a child, deliberately drinking from both white and colored water fountains just to see if there was any difference. There wasn't. By the time he got to college, he said, I was angry with a system that led me on and betrayed me and destroyed most of my faith in a lot of humankind. These weren't wild-eyed radicals. Blair's father was a member of the NAACP and a teacher. McNeil quoted Aristotle and Plato and wore Italian shoes. His roommate, Kazan, remembered wanting to borrow his sweaters because maybe the magic will come off on me. They were preparing for lives as professionals, as leaders, and they were fed up. The plan came together on January 31st, 1960, the night before. McNeil had been talking with a local white businessman, Ralph Johns, the son of Syrian immigrants, who ran a clothing store catering to black students. Johns was something of an eccentric. He'd put signs in his window reading, God hates segregation, and had been trying for years to convince students to challenge segregation. He was also savvy about publicity. The students agreed to stop by his store before heading to Woolworth's so Johns could alert the press. Blair had watched a documentary about Gandhi's use of nonviolent resistance. McNeil, who was in ROTC, brought a military precision to the planning. They would buy something first to establish themselves as customers, keep the receipts as evidence, remain polite no matter what happened, and not leave until served or arrested. Richmond, a Greensboro native, knew the terrain. McCain brought the anger that had been building since childhood. What I find myself thinking about is the uncertainty they must have felt that night. They genuinely didn't know what would happen. McCain later admitted he didn't expect to walk out of that store. He thought they'd be dragged to jail or worse. Joseph McNeil said he was anxious and just wanted to get going, get it over with. They were teenagers, preparing for what they believed might end their lives or their futures just to order coffee. The second day, 25 students showed up. By the third day, over 60. By the fourth day, more than 300 were spilling out onto the sidewalk. Women from Bennett College, a historically black women's institution nearby, were there from the beginning. They'd actually been planning their own protest before the A&T4 acted. For months afterward, it was the Bennett women who sustained the daily presence, who made picket signs, who organized strategy sessions. Nearly half of Bennett's entire student body would eventually be arrested for their activism. Their president, Willa Player, refused to order them back to class. She brought them food and blankets in jail. 3 white women from the Women's College of the University of North Carolina joined on day 4, Jeannie Seaman, Marilyn Lott, and Ann Dearsley. The Ku Klux Klan's official chaplain showed up to heckle. Bomb threats were called in. White counter-protesters poured ketchup and sugar on the students' heads, stubbed cigarettes on their backs, set one protester's coat on fire. Through it all, The students sat reading textbooks and Goethe, studying for their classes. Within 2 weeks, sit-ins had erupted in dozens of cities across the South. By the end of March, the movement had spread to 55 cities in 13 states. By April, 70,000 people had participated in sit-ins nationwide. That month, at Shaw University in Raleigh, student leaders from across the South gathered for a conference organized by Ella Baker of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. There, they founded the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, SNCC, which would become one of the most important and influential organizations of the entire civil rights movement. John Lewis, Julian Bond, Diane Nash, and Marion Barry all found their calling through what those 4 freshmen started. On July 25, 1960, nearly 6 months after it began, the Greensboro Woolworths finally integrated. The store had lost $200,000, more than $2 million in today's money. Store manager Clarence Harris, facing salary cuts for missing sales targets, quietly asked 4 black employees to step out of uniform and order at the counter. Geneva Tisdale, Susie Morrison, Anitha Jones, and Charles Bess became the first black patrons served at a Woolworth's lunch counter. It happened without fanfare, no reporters, no photographs of this particular moment. Just 4 workers are finally able to eat where they work. 4 years later, the Civil Rights Act of 1964 made such discrimination illegal nationwide. Here's what troubles me about how we remember this story. We tend to stop there, at the victory. But the lives of the Greensboro 4 themselves tell us something more complicated about courage and its costs. Joseph McNeil went on to have an extraordinary career. He graduated from A&T, joined the Air Force, flew combat missions over Vietnam, and eventually retired as a major general. He married a woman of Lakota descent, the great-great-granddaughter of Chief Sitting Bull. He lived to be 83, passing away just a few months ago in September 2025. Franklin McCain became a chemist, worked for the Celanese Corporation for 35 years, served on the boards of multiple universities, and spent his later years mentoring young people in Charlotte. When Obama was elected, McCain told A&T alumni that the hard work was just about to begin. Ezell Blair Jr. found life in Greensboro difficult after the sit-ins. He was labeled a troublemaker, the same thing David Richmond faced. In 1965, he moved to Massachusetts, eventually converted to Islam, and changed his name to Jibril Kazan. Today, at 83, he remains the last surviving member of the Greensboro 4, working as a teacher and counselor. And David Richmond? Of all of them, his story haunts me most. He stayed in Greensboro, tried to finish his degree, fell behind in his studies amid the chaos and celebrity, and eventually dropped out just 3 credits short. He received death threats. He couldn't find work. Employers knew his name, knew his face, saw him as a troublemaker. He moved to the mountains for 9 years, came back to care for his aging parents, and struggled with alcoholism and depression. He died of lung cancer in 1990 at 49 years old and was posthumously awarded an honorary doctorate at his own memorial service. Those who knew him said David Richmond seemed haunted by the fact that he couldn't do more to change the world. His life, in a sense, peaked at 18, when he and 3 friends decided to sit down for coffee. We're still living with the consequences of what happened at that lunch counter. The tactics pioneered in Greensboro, nonviolent direct action, economic pressure through boycotts, the strategic use of media, became the template for social movements around the world. The Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee went on to organize freedom rides, voter registration drives, and the Mississippi Freedom Summer of 1964. Its alumni include civil rights icons and members of Congress. But we're also still grappling with questions those four students forced us to confront. What does it mean when the system is so broken that simple decency becomes a revolutionary act? What do we owe to those who sacrifice their futures for progress? And how do we remember movements in ways that honor not just the triumphant moments, but the complex human beings who made them possible, including those whose lives never recovered? The philosopher George Santayana wrote that those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it. But I'd add this: those who recognize only the victories and not the costs understand nothing at all. I'm Richard Backus, and this is the Daily History Chronicle. Tomorrow, we'll explore another moment that shaped our world. Until then, consider this. What would you have done at 18, knowing you might be arrested, beaten, or worse, for asking to be treated like a human being? And what quiet acts of courage might be happening right now in your own community that history will one day recognize as turning points? Because that's what the Greensboro sit-in teaches us. Not just about segregation, not just about courage, but about how ordinary people at the right moment, with nothing but determination in each other, can bend the arc of history. Thank you for your time. If you enjoyed this episode, then please subscribe. If you really enjoyed it, then please tell a friend. I hope you will join me again tomorrow for more of our shared history.